Welcome everyone to the first Herpetology Hangouts of 2021, hosted by the Canadian Herpetological Society. My name is Pamela Rutherford. I'm an associate professor at Brandon University in Brandon, Manitoba, and I'm currently president of the Canadian Herpetological Society. Before we begin today, I would like to share a bit about myself, my heritage, and recognize the ancestral history of Canada. I grew up in Ontario. My parents are Paul and Joan Rutherford, and my ancestors emigrated to Canada from Europe. I want to pay my respects to the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Cree, Dene, and Métis peoples who were the first keepers of the land where I currently reside, in Brandon, Manitoba. Today we are meeting virtually, coast to coast to coast, across Canada, and I would like to acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. As herpetologists, our natural lands and the animals within them are extremely important to us. This recognition is a renewal of our commitment as a society to listening to and cherishing the traditional knowledge that Indigenous people have of Canada's reptiles and amphibians. I also want to welcome any international participants we have today and the experience and heritage they bring with them. Greetings to everyone and your ancestors. Welcome to you all. I will now turn it over to Julie O'Reilly, a member of the Meetings and Workshops Committee, and she will introduce herself and our speaker today.
Hi, everyone. I am very pleased today to introduce Fortunate Mafeta Parker. He will be talking today about, his title of his talk today is Wildlife in Vernacular, an initiative to include Indigenous cultures in the conservation of Herpetofauna in a multicultural society. And we were really lucky for him to join us all the way from South Africa. Fingers crossed the internet connection holds, otherwise we'll have to maybe try to triage it midway via phone, but hopefully all is well. And he is currently a PhD candidate jointly at both Northwest University and Hasselt University. He is also one of the board members of a conservation NGO called Youth African Wildlife. More generally, he is an author and environmental scientist who is interested in the relationship between people's culture and wildlife. And I can't wait to hear his talk and learn more about his exciting work. So whenever you're ready, Fortunate, please go ahead.
Cool. Thank you, Julia. I just gonna switch on my video for a couple of seconds. There you go. Hello, everyone. For most of the talk, I'm gonna have my video off because I would say my internet connection is terrible, but that would be an understatement. So yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure no one is here to see my pretty face. So the video will be off and we can hopefully have a stable internet connection for most of the time. I did the opposite of a rain dance because when it rains, there is practically no internet connection. So hopefully my ancestors like me today and they will they'll keep the rain away. All right, cool. There we go. There's my talk. Okay, so this wildlife in vernacular is quite a special thing because it started off as a pet project, then it became a PhD output, then it became a lifelong commitment, and it was brought about by me seeing that my culture is one underrepresented in wildlife and it's also misrepresented in wildlife, and I thought you know what, I should do something about it and not complain that much. And when I started my postgraduate degree, I noticed that generally not just people in my culture, but in the many cultures of South Africa, people are just generally excluded. And I thought, okay, this might actually turn into a really good PhD project. And um, luckily, I found people who also thought the same thing, and they became my PhD supervisors, and that's how we ended up here. Sorry, just trying to figure out how I'm going to switch between slides. All right, cool. A bit of background on South Africa. Okay, next slide. So South Africa is one of the 17 megadiverse countries of the world. Next slide. And it's also the seventh most ethnically and culturally diverse country in the world. Next slide. But with that said, South Africa, when you were South African wildlife, I should say, is mostly published in two of the 11 official languages. And I say 11 official languages because there are more languages in South Africa, but only 11 of them have been officialized. And of those 11, 9 are indigenous languages. And this 9 includes no, not includes, excludes the San, the Khoi and the San languages, which is it is quite sad because they were here before everyone else. So they are the truly indigenous South Africans. Next slide. So as mentioned in the intro, indigenous people and their cultures were historically excluded from wildlife matters. But now there's a law that was passed in 1998 and other laws after that that seek to make environmental matters more inclusive than they were before. Yeah, next slide. And the thing with South African cultures is that they are inseparable from wildlife. And when I say inseparable, I mean really inseparable. For one, a lot of indigenous people still use traditional medicine, and traditional medicine is mostly derived from plants. Then you have the names of places which are also tied to wildlife, and then you also have the idioms that are tied to wildlife, and you have our totems that are tied to wildlife. For instance, my totem is a scaly feathered finch. Personally, I'd prefer a frog, but we don't get to choose our totems. But it's a scaly feathered finch, and how it's put is that I am one with the scaly feathered finch. So when you harm the scaly feathered finch, you harm me. And beyond the totems, there's also names, given names, praise names, and just clan names. You get last names. The people have last names like elephant, like in my language it'd be Grow, or you have my mother's other name is also Grow, which is elephant, and my son's name is crocodile or Kwena in my language. Sadly for me, I don't have any animal first name, which is quite sad. My name just means the one who's passing by. Speaking of passing by, next slide. So why frogs and reptiles? Frogs and reptiles are generally understudied. Next slide. Mostly, and they mostly have a negative public perception attached to them. You get people saying that they're tied to witchcraft, they bring bad luck into the home, and all sorts of other things which in my family, I've managed to debunk by regularly bringing frogs and reptiles into our home, and there has been no bad luck, and there has been no unexpected family death. So that's working. Next slide. And global populations are also declining. So when you compare the reasons I studied, I included cultural diversity in my studies, and the reasons I included herpetofaunal diversity in wildlife. It's you start to see some similarities. Both are generally ignored, and both mostly have a public perception, and both the languages and the frogs and reptiles are threatened by extinction. So basically, anything that's excluded attracts me, and I just want to do something about it. Next slide. So Julia mentioned that I'm part of a conservation organization, and how that helped. Since it's a non-scientist organization, I've learned a lot about how to convey conservation messages, especially the complicated scientific conservation messages, to people that know nothing about science or have no interest in science. Next slide. So one of the most important lessons I've learned from a conservation organization is never dumb it down. Just make it relatable. For me, when people dumb things down, it means that the people you're speaking to are dumb. And when you make it relatable, is that you take whatever you're saying, whatever message you're saying, and you frame it in the audience's context. Um, what I did here with this group on the table is the kids are primary school and high school learners, and most of the elders here are their teachers. And I wanted to teach them about ecosystems and trophic levels in our ecosystems. So those blocks you see on the table, those modified Jenga blocks. So the concept here is that each level within the tower represents a different trophic level, and the message I was trying to convey is that everything is just dependent. If you take too much from one trophic level, it just messes everything up. And at the end of this lesson, they asked me to give them um, the Jenga blocks and write down the lessons for them, and they enjoyed it a lot, and they promised to carry the message forward. Next slide. So another important lesson that I've learned from the conservation organization is that it's never ideal to come up with interventions in an office and then just take them and export them to a community and say, here's conservation lessons for you. We hope you like them. It's better to go to the community and ask them what they want to learn about, and ask them how they want to learn about, and ask them what inhibitions do they have about whatever animal that you want to teach them about. This is, give you an example, this is a picture while we were driving around in a nature reserve. I asked the teachers and the learners what they wanted to learn about, and they said everything, which was a bit tricky at first, but then I thought, this is great. I'm catering lessons to what they want. So what we did basically was just drove for a couple of minutes and then stop, and whatever I see turns into a lesson, like this shell of leopard tortoise. So this turned into a lesson about evolution and skeletal adaptations. And then I have some scales in my left hand, and also learned about the different scales that reptiles had or have, sorry. Um, Next slide, please. So because a study of this nature is not a normal thing in South Africa or in most parts of the world, I needed a pilot project. Next slide. So this pilot project was meant to test whether the public is interested in frogs. Next slide. And to also test whether it makes scientific sense to research cultural diversity and diversity of herpetofauna at the same time and the interactions between the two. Next slide. And if the first two aims turned out really well, then the project would be expanded. This was way back in 2016. Next slide. So this pilot project was conducted in the northeastern corner of South Africa. Um, it's called, the region is called Zululand. That corner over there is the most biodiverse part of our country. Next slide. And within that area, there was one language, one indigenous language, but there were 5 different areas within that, 5 different regions within that study area, and this meant that there would be 5 different dialects of the same language, and the group of people that we got together ranged from nature conservation guides, which are the guys that you see on screen left. And there were also high school students. There were also people who weren't really studying nature or interested in nature, but knew some culturally related information about nature, and they just joined in. And there were also conservation students there. So we tried to get a diverse range of people as possible. Next slide. So going back to the reason why this Zululand was chosen as a pilot study area is that it's both culturally and biologically um, diverse, and it's like a small piece of South Africa, and we thought, okay, we can use this as a pilot, and if it works out, then it means there's a good chance this type of study will work out in the entire country. Next slide. So how we engaged with the people, we had an amphibian diversity workshop, and we made it semi-formal so that we have a set number of questions that we ask people to make sure that we get the data that we need. And the informal part of it was that these questions often sparked a lot of discussion, and we never stopped that discussion. We let the discussion continue, and while people were discussing, I would ask more questions and just keep making notes, and everything was conducted in their local language. Next slide. And the data that we wanted to get was, do locals want to learn about frogs? What curiosities do they have about frogs? Um, what does their culture say about frogs? What inhibitions do they have about frogs? Do they have any folklore about frogs? Is there any folk tales that they want to share with us? Next slide. And as the the workshop went on and we were sharing information back and forth, you could see the inhibitions towards frogs just slowly disappearing. When this guy came in, he wouldn't touch the red toad that he has in his hand. But in the 3 hours that the workshop ran, he, by the end of it, wanted to take a selfie, and you can see that I think they're shaking hands. I don't know, but he's no longer apprehensive towards the frog. Next slide. But of course, not everyone was convinced that they are comfortable enough to touch a frog, and some were a bit more apprehensive, still apprehensive towards the frogs, and they just wanted to admire from afar. Next slide. As you can see here, the guy that's standing up is very happy to handle frogs. The guy in the black t-shirt is like, I'm not too sure about this. And then the lady is like, yeah, you guys have lost your minds. Next slide. So once the data was collected, there was a couple of months of writing and back and forth consultations with the community, just to clarify some things, clarify some names of frogs, and clarify some cultural knowledge about frogs. And after that, the pilot had achieved all three aims. Next slide. So the first aim was that public interest about frogs was there. Everyone was keen to learn about frogs. Next slide. And from a scientific perspective, I had proof that this was a worthy scientific pursuit. It was no longer just a pet project that I had. And these are the outcomes to date based on that pilot study that happened in 2016. Next slide. So the book is actually a peer-reviewed book, and it's a double-sided book. So on the one side it's a English book, and when you flip it over, it's written in isiZulu, which is one of the indigenous languages. And this is a South African first on many levels. It's a comprehensive guide to South African frogs, albeit a very small part of South Africa, but it's in indigenous language, and it's also peer reviewed. So the school was really happy that they took a gamble on this project. Next slide. And the last of our aims was to expand the project, since the aims 1 and 2 were met. And the nice little extra is that this book is a success, even though it was meant for one corner of one project, one province, sorry. The book has been delivered to 8 of the 9 South African provinces, and it has also been delivered to Belgium. One book made it to Germany, and another book has made it to, actually quite a few books have made it to the UK. And I think there's another book in Brazil. So this is just nice extras that came with publishing this book. And since every year since this book was published, there has been some sort of recognition, either be an award or an honorable mention dedicated to this book. Next slide. So now we've come to how this project got expanded from one corner of South Africa to the entire country. Next slide. So from the 2016 pilot project, this became a PhD project in 2018, and I'm expected to put out a few scientific articles, and sure enough, there are some, so far there's 4 scientific articles in the works. Next slide. And because this was born out of this pet project of mine, there's also an unscientific output that will continue beyond this PhD, which is wild vernac. Next slide. So this is the title of the PhD project. The main aim of the project is to see whether we can, from the interactions between cultural diversity and diversity of frogs and reptiles in South Africa, is there a way of coming up with science-based policy tools for conservation and also increasing social inclusion in this field of science. Next slide. And so the non-scientific outputs, one of them is definitely another book in one of the international languages, or in all 9 of them possibly. Yeah, next slide. And the other non-scientific output is wild vernac, which is short for wildlife in vernacular. It's more than just a website. It's a lot of things. It's actually quite difficult to explain what it is, but I call it a crazy idea to present wildlife in vernacular. Next slide. So for one, this wild vernac is a data collection tool. So I want to document as much as possible with regards to names, cultural perceptions, and anything culture related that relates to South African wildlife, starting with frogs and reptiles. And once I'm done with collecting most of the cultural knowledge relating to frogs and reptiles, I'll just move on to other species. Next slide. And the other parts of the website, or the other tools of the website, is that there's a page where you can get translations if you ever want to write anything in the local languages, and you need, say, maybe translation of a name of some animal, or a translation of a scientific term. There's the translations page. And for reading material, it's for people that want to read beyond wild vernac. I trying to find out if there's any other local language material that has been published, and just with the permission of the authors, put it there so that people can just hop on over whenever they feel like there's something they need to read about. And there's also the posters page. Right now I'm working on posters using animals that the information is already readily available. So I've started with the big 5. Yeah, I mean, here I am ignoring the charismatic species until now, but they have to come in at some point. But later on, this will be flooded with posters of frogs and reptiles. Next slide. So there's also one non-scientific and non-quantifiable output that you can never write about in a scientific article. It's the gratitude. This is the schools that three of the schools that the book has made it to, and the book has actually been delivered to over 100 schools in the province in KwaZulu-Natal. And every time the books get delivered, you get these pictures of smiley faces and teachers saying thank you. I mean, the quality of the pictures is mostly bad, but it's never the quality that matters in this regard. It's the content. This is heartwarming content. I wish I could put heartwarming on one of the scientific articles and watch the reviewer have a heart attack when they read it, but sadly I can't do that. And one of the fondest moments of gratitude was I went to a community which was 6 hours from my home, and I was meant to spend an hour there with one family, and it ended up being 3 hours with about 10 families. And at the end of it, they gave me food for the road, and they gave me some gardening tips, organic gardening tips, and they gave me some marriage advice. They gave me some plants to bring home, and these are the things that you can never write about. But this is for me the most important part of my pet project, is that people appreciate the time and effort that I put into uplifting our ignored cultures. Next slide. So these are the references that I used. There's actually quite a lot more of those, but these are some of them. I'm happy to provide the full list of references if anyone would like to read up on whatever I'm doing. Okay, next slide. Of course, none of this would have been possible without a few people having faith in my crazy ideas, because this is the best way to sum up the ideas. It's crazy ideas. It's something that is not usual in science, and I still get a lot of negative feedback saying, yeah, this is not environmental science, this is social science. But with a bit of stubborn determination, it's staying in environmental science. Next slide. And with that, I'd like to say thank you. There's just too much to cover, and I tried to just point out the highlights. So this is basically discussing 5 years worth of work in about 30 minutes or so. Okay, thank you guys. I'm happy to take questions and discuss if anyone is keen to do that. Thanks, Julia and Pam.
Thank you so much. I loved hearing about the origin story of wild vernacular. So I'll give a big round of applause. I'm happy to facilitate questions either by asking those that are in the chat, or if people would like to turn on their videos or their audio and say the questions for themselves. I'm also happy to call on folks. Just write that you would like to be called upon in the chat. I have a question. I'm going to start.
Hey, cool.
So first I need to get a copy of that book before I leave South Africa. So I'll put that on my to-do list. It looks amazing. And I'll start with maybe kind of something that was a different perception that I got when I first moved to South Africa. So I was kind of shocked coming from as a herpetologist to South Africa, seeing people having a negative perception of animals like chameleons and lizards and geckos. And I was just wondering, have you come across any traditional positive perceptions of herps in South African cultures?
Yes, the one example that is my favorite example. There's one of the clans. It's a Xhosa clan, the Majola clan. Their totem is a snake. It's either one of the splitting cobras, it's either the Cape Cobra or the Rinkels. It's just the explanations differ. But the important part is that this snake is so revered that what they do is they have two piles of firewood in their yards. The one pile is untouched. That's the ancestral pile. That's where the snake is free to live. Then there's the other pile which is used for firewood. So the snake, no one is scared of that snake. No one ever bothers that snake. And there's also the closest I've got using the explanation that I have is that the boomslang is the totem of the Buthelezi. The name Buthelezi might be familiar to some people. He's the prince of the Zulu nation, and he's very big in conservation, especially rhino conservation. He's very pro rhino conservation, and the snake is revered. No one harms the snake. Even when they go into the woods and they don't see the snake, they come back a bit disappointed. Then away from the Nguni cultures, more to my cultures, is you have it's either the water monitor or the rock monitor. Still explanations. Is a totem for some Tswana clans and some Sepedi clans. So there are these, once something is a totem, it's taboo to kill it, it's taboo to harm it. And because you are the totem and the totem is you, you need to protect it. And protecting your totem means protecting its habitat. So in that way, there's a conservation spin-off. People can get to protecting habitats and for the sake of their totem. But yeah, there's some really good positives, and one that is, well, frogs don't feature that much, sadly, but in Chivenda culture and Xitsonga culture, they believe that frogs, and in Zulu also actually, they believe that frogs are rainmakers. So because we cherish rain is a sign of prosperity for many South African cultures, something that is a rainmaker is something that you cherish and never want to harm.
Of course. Thank you for sharing those. I hadn't heard of any of those before, so I really appreciate you sharing them with me. I think everyone's expressing in the chat how much they want to get a copy of the book, so maybe I should order a few more and then bring them back to Canada with me when I move back there. But I don't think I've missed any other questions. Nick Cairns has a question. Are frogs viewed differently depending on appearance and seasonality?
The Geez, Nicholas, that's quite a difficult one. Never thought of it, but appearance, I would say.
Oh, Nick says
A
he can
bit.
clarify.
No, no. I completely understand. The question is just
Okay.
something.
Okay.
Okay.
It's just something I've never had to deal with. But in terms of appearance, I know the toads, especially the brownish, the dull-looking toads, are generally not liked. Um, but the more colorful ones, and the thing with toads is they are not liked because they come into people's yards, and the more colorful ones are generally left alone because a lot of them are reed frogs, and reed frogs don't usually stray into people's yards, and unless it's the painted reed frog, which is like a little mouse, it goes everywhere basically. Um, and in terms of seasonality, Nicholas, you can tell me if I'm not answering this correctly. Um, but I know that there are mm, some frogs that like appear once a year, and those are loved simply because people eat them. And there are frogs that only appear in the rainy season, and people don't like them because they are believed to rain from the skies, and these are the xenopus, which are aquatic frogs, and people only see them on land during heavy rain, and people just put two and two together without the biological knowledge and say, okay, this has to have come from the sky. Nicholas, if I'm not answering this correctly, please clarify or follow up.
He says thanks. He says he knows his question was very open-ended, but I think you nailed it.
I appreciate the answer. Yeah, it was that sort of association or rain that you mentioned before that really, because I know that like tree frogs are often really well appreciated. People like them because they're pretty, but sometimes things like our spadefoots and stuff get kind of overlooked and or associated with bad things sometimes. So.
Oh yeah, no, I understand a bit better now. Yeah, like we have the grass frogs, especially the plain grass frogs, which are the more common ones. No one really bothers them because they are always the first ones people see before rain, so they are called the rainmakers. So no one bothers the rainmakers. It's the ones that come after rain that people usually kill, which are the toads and African clawed frogs.
Thank
you.
Cool, thank you, Nicholas. And I see someone shared
Sarah.
The book.
Sarah has a question.
Okay, so for starters, I totally can see a whole series of children's storybooks here. So many really good anecdotes, and in many ways I do very similar work where you're educating and you just holistically have to see what they would like to learn, and storytelling is so valuable. But my question for you is, I congratulate you on how you expanded your project so big, but I'm curious about follow-up and long-term success. And is it too soon to know if you're changing opinions or ideas, or if the knowledge is transferring? And I'm curious, this is kind of maybe second part, is who is the valuable people to talk to? Is it the children or the adults in the community? Who do you think will actually pass the information on? Because you clearly can't be doing the whole country yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the most valuable people either the hunters in the community, or the people that are farmers in the community, or anyone that spends a lot of time outdoors, outside the house, because rural areas are near the wilderness. So it's people that spend a lot of time outside the house and in the wilderness, and mostly people that are in rural areas or have grown up in rural areas. those are the people to target. They have a wealth of information, and how we bring in kids is that we all know, if you're a parent, then you know that a child will hound you into doing whatever they want. So you sort of go through the school to get to the parents to join in on the project, and in that way, that's how we bring in kids. And another set of people that are proving to be very valuable in the project is um, nature conservation guides that um, are of African descent. A lot of the time, they are very great to talk to, because when you talk to someone who doesn't have the scientific knowledge behind this animal you're discussing, it becomes really difficult to identify the animal. So when you have someone who has nature conservation background and training, but they also have the rural upbringing and have been spending a lot of time in the wilderness, they know how to explain animals so that you know which animal they're talking about. Um, in terms of long-term sustainability of the project, there's so many things to explore that I think it'll go on for a while. And if I run out of things in frogs and reptiles, then I'll just switch to the more likable animals. So to give you an example, there's folk taxonomy. That's one chapter that I'm working on. It will be expanded. Then there's I'm trying to see if I can get any knowledge that's usable on the conservation side. So any of the culture views usable in a strictly conservation context. And there's a human health perspective, which I'm quite excited about, because people are consuming these frogs and reptiles. We need to see if they are, one, healthy to consume. Is there any risk of contracting any viruses? And for the reptiles that are used for medicinal purposes, we need to look at biological activity to see whether this actually works or has a bit of value to being used, or is it all just a placebo effect that people get from using frogs and reptiles in traditional medicine?
Thank you so much. To be honest with you, with the exception of the traditional medicine, it's shocking how similar what you do happens even in our communities here, the same approaches and the same tactics. It's shocking, but I mean, I have students who sometimes ask me if they can eat the frog and get stoned, but that's about it. Yeah, thank you for answering my question.
You're welcome.
I'm gonna read out. There's a couple more questions in the chat, so we'll just finish those up, and then so the first one's from Brittany, and she's asking, has there been evidence of any traditional views breaking down over time or across generations? For example, beliefs that may help to protect certain clan or totem species.
Yes, beliefs do break down. This water monitor or rock monitor totem wasn't always a totem. It wasn't always liked. So what happened was their totem was a Kakma baboon, and with a bit of infighting, which is always how good stories start, with a bit of infighting, they broke off from the Kakma baboon clan and took on this monitor lizard to be now their totem. So the perception went from being just another reptile to being that reptile is us. We are the reptile. And in terms of traditional medicine, also is the views on which animals are usable in traditional medicine switch. So as time goes on and people start experimenting, you'll see that some animals did get switched. And also they're not fussy about species. I mean, if it's a lizard, then any lizard will do. So
Okay.
there's a bit of fluidity there, and you get the younger traditional healers that are very open-minded and are more than happy to bring in the conservation message and say, look, we'll only use roadkill. We won't go on hunts anymore for this and for these animals that we use.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Those stories of change over time are quite fascinating. Anyway, that's fascinating to be able to capture that too. And then the last question is from David, and he is asking, he is curious to know what the main barriers you've faced and are still facing in your endeavors with wild vernac.
One of the biggest ones is actually something that was caused by fellow scientists, the older fellow scientists, I should say. It's always the older people that mess things up for the younger people. But anyway, when I go into these traditional medicine markets, people hate me. They've never met me, but they hate me. And I just try to humble myself and make myself appear really, really smaller than I actually am. And as time goes on, I find out that scientists came and they took the knowledge that people were using and they just left. There's no benefit sharing. There's no regard of cultural protocols, which the Nagoya Protocol is doing really one great things. It adds admin for us, but it also protects indigenous knowledge. And another thing that happens is that they don't like us sciencey people because we're trying to impose conservation measures on them without respecting their cultural norms. So what they're saying is usually you speak to people first before you make decisions. But what has happened in the past is that conservation decisions were made and they just imposed them on people, and these people said, nah, this is not how things work. Speak to us and find out how we want to do this. So yeah, that's the two main barriers. People steal cultural knowledge, and they also disrespect the norms that people have, and they put um, the modern knowledge over cultural knowledge, and that creates problems because I'm trying to come up with conservation policy that respects cultures, but it's difficult when the cultural people are saying, no, you guys never want to speak to us, so why should we speak to you?
I think those are two really important points. I think your talk today really has shown through many facets how important social inclusion is in conservation, and in which ways it can really benefit conservation too. So thank you so much again for sharing your talk and your work with us. We really, really appreciate it. And let's all give Fortunate another big round of applause over Zoom. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us. And I think the only thing that I should maybe mention is that next month's Herp Hangout is going to be a job fair. So, and more details will be coming on that in the coming days. So anyway, thanks you again so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.